Each High Holy Day season, I've offered a sermon on what our tradition has to say about a contemporary moral issue. In past years, I've talked about anti-Semitism or climate change, racism, and Israel, just to name a few. This year, as I considered a topic to address, I felt strangely overwhelmed even by the prospect of choosing one. Because our world feels broken. Climate change has created a series of storms and heat waves and flooding that are as intense as they are frequent. The polarity in political discourse is so intense that we have forgotten to talk with people with whom we disagree. The rise of nationalism has created more hatred, more violence, and more brutality. Homelessness is an ever-present problem, as is gun violence and racism, anti-Semitism, and homophobia. There's injustice that is all around us. Sometimes those in power make choices that we simply cannot fathom or understand. The continual stream of bad news can feel so soul-crushing that researcher and psychiatrist Dr. Joachim Radui reported that the best predictor for having lower anxiety and depression is to avoid watching too much news. Many of us choose to take vacations from an ever-ending news stream in order to preserve our mental health. I've done that myself on occasion. It's not that I don't want to know what's going on in the world. Indeed, we all know that that's important. Rather, when there is so much pain that exists around us, even a consummate optimist like myself begins to wonder if anything will get better. Even though I want to protect the earth and stand up for justice to help create a more loving and compassionate world, can my actions actually make a true difference? So today I don't want to talk about a specific moral issue. Instead, I ask you a different kind of question. Perhaps it's a question that we've all been asking ourselves for some time. How do we find the strength to respond to an ailing world, even if we don't know that our hard work will make a difference at all? There's a story of a town that couldn't tell time. They knew how to tell time. The problem was that slowly every single clock in the town had stopped working. The people tried diligently to fix their clocks, but despite all of their hard work, they were unable to fix a single one. There was no one in the town who understood the inner mechanisms of the springs and the pendulums, the dials and the gears. Despite their very best efforts, no one could fix these clocks. Days passed, then weeks, and then months. They held on to their watches, their clocks, their timepieces, hoping that one day someone would be able to fix them, and that they would bounce back to life once more. After a few years, a foreigner wandered into their secluded town. When the people found out that he was a watchmaker, you can only imagine their excitement. They believed that their dreams had finally come true, and they were beyond elated. The townspeople gathered their clocks, and one by one, they brought them to the watchmaker, presented them, and said, "Here, please fix it." And then one by one, they left, feeling downcast and disappointed. Their clocks were unrepairable. One woman, however, left her meeting with the watchmaker with a smile on her face and a ticking timepiece in her hand. All the townspeople wanted to know how this could possibly be. Why was it that her timepiece was the only one that was working in the entire town? And she explained that when all of their clocks stopped, she didn't know what to do. It was overwhelming, right? So each morning, she decided to do what she could. She wound the dial on her clock as if it worked, hoping that one day it would, in fact, tick again. Whereas all of the townspeople clocks had rusted with time, her small act of care, repeated diligently each day, made it possible for her clock to be repaired. I imagine her waking up and turning that clock each and every morning, having no idea why she really was doing so or if her clock would ever work again. And despite that, keeping up this practice every day for not days or weeks or months, but actually for years, her determination, her stubborn hopefulness would have seemed foolish to anyone else who was watching her do this. It seems so insignificant, this action that she did, that it's almost laughable. And yet, because of that small act, repeated one day after another, her timepiece was the one that could come back to life. The story is a hopeful reminder that while sweeping legislation or initiatives are needed to face the complexity of the world's issues, small actions repeated over time are actually just as necessary. The watchmaker, even with all of his expertise, could not fix a watch that hadn't been cared for. Small stitches are required to crochet a kippah. Training is required to run a marathon. And becoming a bar mitzvah requires practicing every day. Right, Noam? Wherever you are? And even more to the point, to have a supportive interfaith community, as we are so blessed to have, first requires clergy, including ones here today, including ones that will be here throughout Yom Kippur, to build relationships of respect and appreciation through all the small steps that takes along the way. To quote Pirkei Avot, "It is not up to us to complete the task, but neither are we free to desist from it." So how do we find strength to respond to our ailing world, even if we don't know that our hard work will make a difference at all? By taking one small step followed by another. It can be easy to take these small efforts for granted or to stop prioritizing them. But as the story reminds us, small actions can make a difference, sometimes far greater than we even know. Several years ago, I was leading a weekly Tat Shabbat for the most adorable group of preschoolers. And each week we sang songs, we paraded around the room, we engaged in stories and played instruments. All of the children were so enthusiastic and involved, all except for one little girl. This little girl sat there the entire time with her arms folded, looking at me like this. And I would try anything to try to engage her. I brought out art, I tried to engage her in the singing, I put her into the stories, I did every single thing that I could possibly think of, and still she sat there like this. One day, I contacted her mom, asking how she was doing and if there was anything else that I could do to ensure that her daughter had a wonderful experience. And the mom's reply completely blew me away. She sent me a video of this little girl who had sat there that morning looking like this with her little toy guitar, singing every single song that we had sung that morning perfectly and with incredible enthusiasm. The mom said she's been singing since the minute she left temple, and she can't stop talking about the story that you told. It was an amazing reminder that we don't always know the impact that we're having. Sometimes it might appear that our actions are having no effect at all, only to find out that we were making a difference. That little girl has now grown up to be an incredible young lady, passionate about her Jewish identity. And I feel blessed to have been a small part of the reason why. Whenever I'm wondering if I'm doing enough, I always go back to this story, reminding myself that just like an iceberg, only a fraction of our impact is truly visible. So how do we respond? How do we find the strength to respond to the ailing world, even if we don't know our hard work makes a difference? By remembering that we are often unaware of the impact that our actions have on others. But what if my efforts with this adorable preschooler hadn't worked? What if the woman's decision to turn that clock's dial each day hadn't done anything at all? Would those efforts have been worth it? Does our success depend on the outcome, or is the very act of trying, of putting in the effort, valuable in its own right? There's a story of a rabbi who was trying to do his best to help others. One day, a man came to him asking for help. "I'm sick and can't work," he said. "My wife is so sick she can't even get out of bed. We don't have enough money. Our children are hungry. Rabbi, can you please help me? Help us just until I get well enough to go back to work." This wasn't the first time, even that day, that this rabbi had been asked for assistance. He felt weighed down by the needs of the community, by so many who were struggling financially. The rabbi knew that helping this man wouldn't diminish the needs of others one bit, but as he looked into the eyes of this particular man, he knew he had to do something. He knew he wanted to help. So after a long conversation of listening and offering pastoral support, the rabbi opened his wallet and took out a large bill. He handed it to the man and wished him well, and the man thanked him and went on his way, as the rabbi offered a prayer for the man's family's health and well-being. That afternoon, a neighbor came up to the rabbi and said, "Rabbi, do you know that man who came to you this morning, the one who talked about his sick family and his children who are hungry?" "Yes, I know who you're talking about," the rabbi said. "Well, it's not true," the neighbor protested. "None of them are sick. They're all healthy. They're doing just fine." Now, upon hearing news like this, how would you respond? Right? We might, upon hearing this, be angry or resentful. Who is this man to lie to us? How dare he take advantage when there are so many people who truly are in need of help and support? But not this rabbi. This rabbi's jaw dropped open at the news as he breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Thank God they are healthy. Thank God they're okay." The rabbi seemed not concerned at all. So the neighbor went on protesting, No, Rabbi, I don't think you get it. The man took advantage of you. He lied to get your money." "I lost $100, the rabbi said. "What's that compared to the health of a family?" The rabbi's first response wasn't anger or defensiveness. His first response was relief that the family was actually okay. The rabbi could have been bitter, pledging to never give so freely again, but it was not in his nature to do so. Even after learning that he had been swindled, the rabbi did not regret his choice. How could he regret a moment of compassion? Next time, maybe he'd be a little bit more discerning before giving money quite so generously, but he would not let this incident stop him from being the generous and considerate person that he was at his core. Yes, people could take advantage, but when he felt moved to give, he would do so anyway. You might recall how a year and a half ago, my friend and colleague, Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, was held hostage in his synagogue at gunpoint after welcoming a stranger to pray with his community. That harrowing ordeal forever changed Rabbi Citron Walker's life, though everyone who was in that synagogue was fortunate enough to leave without being harmed. This past spring, I saw him and I asked him if the event had changed him, if he would be able to welcome in the stranger in the way that he did before. And his response to me was exactly what I predicted it would be, knowing my friend Charlie. He would not allow this man who terrorized his synagogue to change the core of who he was, not one bit. Rabbi Citron Walker, like the rabbi in our story, understood that while others might take advantage or threaten us, there is something that they can never take, and that something is our integrity. How do we find the strength to respond to our ailing world, even if we don't know that our hard work will make a difference at all? By staying true to who we are, even when it's difficult to do so. Maimonides, the famous medieval philosopher, taught that there are 8 rungs for charitable giving, and among the highest levels is tzedakah. Tzedakah is when the giver and the recipient are actually completely unknown to one another. In this scenario, the giver can never be acknowledged because the recipient has no idea who the giver is. And more than that, the giver will also never know if their donation had any impact at all because the giver doesn't know who the recipient is. This type of giving is one of the truest and purest types because it's a giving that isn't dependent on outcome or celebrated with praise. Those who give in this way do so because they feel a moral calling that isn't dependent on others' praise or outcome at all. They give simply for the satisfaction of giving, for the knowledge of knowing that they did something good, no matter what comes of it. This is our calling, to be kind not because we're sure that kindness will be met with grace, but because we choose to be kind. To be generous even while knowing someone may take advantage, because we choose to be generous. To trust even when we know that trust can be broken, because we choose to be trusting. Mother Teresa famously said, "People are often unreasonable, irrational, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people might accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. What you spend years creating, others can destroy overnight. Create anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, some may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today will often be forgotten. Do good anyway. Give the best you have, and it may never be enough, but give your best anyway. For you see, in the end, it is between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway." There will be times in the year ahead when we feel overwhelmed by the number and intensity of world problems, when we find ourselves getting anxious or depressed, unsure about whether there is anything that we can do that will make things better. When we do, let us remember that even small actions repeated over time can truly have an impact, that we are so often unaware of the profundity with which we inspire others and enrich their lives, that no matter what the outcome, being true to our deepest moral values is worthwhile in and of itself. This morning, in a short while, we will hear the shofar calls. The first 3 blasts are an awakening, a calling to each do our part to create a kinder and more compassionate world. But there is one final blast that is entirely different. The Tekiah Gedolah is long enough to give us time to channel our internal moral compass, to call us to be the best versions of ourselves, not only when it's convenient, not only when we're sure we will be rewarded for doing so, but when it is challenging as well. To act not because others expect us to, but because we want to remain true to the generous, kind, and thoughtful people that we are at our very core. May we so strengthen our integrity that even when faced with enormous challenges, we choose to do the right thing